In today's video, I'm going to share with you 3 stories, each more disturbing than the last, and all of them taking place under the same exact roof. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get into today's stories. In the year 1900, a writer moved into 14 West 10th Street in Greenwich Village. He had had a successful career up to this point, but right now he was feeling very depressed. He had invested a lot of his money into new inventions and technology that had become obsolete over the years, and so once again he was looking for any new thing to be writing about in order to try to pick his life back up again. Not only was he depressed because of his financial issues, but his daughter had recently died of meningitis. And so not really feeling inspired over the last few years, he said, you know what, maybe a change of scenery is what I need. So he found 14 West 10th Street and may have found it at a little bit of a deal because people were starting to believe that this house might actually be cursed. People had talked about maybe there were some ghost sightings, and the previous resident, who was a famed cyclist for his time, he went out for a bike ride one day and kind of just spaced out and hit an 8-year-old boy and broke his leg, and that cyclist would get arrested. But this writer wasn't really a believer in the paranormal, and this supposed curse didn't really frighten him. However, that didn't stop him from writing about a paranormal event that occurred within this new home. So one night he's sitting in his living room, he's got a fireplace in it with some wood pieces off to the side, and he's completely alone. There's nobody else there. Now the writer just happened to pick his head up at the right moment and take a look over at these wood pieces sitting by this fireplace, and he noticed that one of them was moving. But again, there's nobody else in the room. And not only is it moving, but it almost looks like it's getting lifted up by somebody who isn't there. Now the writer knows that he's alone. He is positive he is alone. But the room is dark, and so not wanting to take any chances, he turns to the side table where he had his pistol, and he took his pistol and he fired it at that wood piece. The wood piece falls down to the floor, and the writer kind of just looks around, again checks to make sure that he is completely alone. And then he approaches this wood piece and he gets a good look at it. And what he found was there was actually a little bit of blood on the wood piece. Now, where did this blood come from? There's no one else in the room. Now, the writer convinced himself that a rat was responsible for this, that a rat had gotten into these wood pieces and had started dragging one somewhere closer to the fire. But upon further inspection, there was no rat. There was no body of a rat that he had shot at. This is just one of a handful of different experiences that people have had at 14 West 10th Street. That writer only lived at this address for a little over a year, and when he died about a decade later in Connecticut, his ghost apparently came back to this address, and people have claimed to see him the most at 14 West 10th Street. People have claimed to see him wandering through the hallways, particularly on the first floor and on the lower level landing of the staircase. And people know it's him. He has a very distinct appearance. He had this fluffy white hair and a very thick mustache. In 1937, a mother and daughter claimed to have seen this ghost, and the ghost even spoke to them. He said, "My name is Clemens, and I has a problem here I gotta settle." And then he vanished into thin air. Although that writer's birth name was Samuel Clemens, we know him better today as Mark Twain. Jan Bryant Bartell was another writer moving into 14 West 10th Street and did so with her husband in 1957. Now, like Mark Twain, she was a skeptic of the paranormal, but that all changed the very first night that she slept there. She heard these consistent noises in the house, and she was convinced there's something else here with us. A few weeks later, Jan felt this monstrous moving shadow behind her on the stairs, and she had her hair tied up, but she could feel this brush of something on the back of her neck. And then she turns around very quickly and there's nothing there. But she could feel the hairs on her arms starting to raise, and she knew there's something in front of me. I just can't see it. And Jan knew that people had made reports that they had seen ghosts or felt some sort of lingering spirits in this house. But because of a housing shortage, she was out of luck. She was being forced to live in a haunted house. She reported that food that neither her husband nor her had purchased would just appear randomly on the table, and it would be rotting as if it had been left out for days. The Bartells also had dogs, and they had a dog that would just stare at this empty chair and just start barking incessantly at it as if there was something there that the dog didn't like. And then finally one day, a man materialized in Jan's room. And she started approaching this man who she knew was a ghost, but she was approaching it because she wanted to touch it. She reached her hand out to touch this man, and she described this as a substance without substance. It was chilly, damp, and she could feel her fingers freezing at the tips. And not before long, the man disappeared. It had been 7 years in this apartment before they contacted a paranormal expert and a medium. A medium is a person who claims that they can connect to the spirit world. The paranormal expert and this medium come over, and the medium immediately feels a presence in this house. She goes, "There are dead things under your floorboards. There's a young girl, there's an aborted child, there's a small gray cat too." And then this medium became possessed by a 19-year-old girl who started yelling that President Lincoln killed my husband. He sent him off to fight in the Civil War. And then she cried over her aborted child. The paranormal expert attempted to shoo away all of these different spirits, claiming that there were at least 22 ghosts inside of this house, including Mark Twain. And then the medium started shouting, "No, I will never leave this house. This is my home." So at this point, the Bartells no longer feel safe, and they pack up all their stuff, and they leave. Now, being that she was a writer, Jan wrote about her experiences living at 14 West 10th Street in a book titled Spindrift, Spray from a Psychic Sea. Any copies of this book that are still floating around do not tend to be cheap, but if you do get your hands on one, you can read all about her experiences at this house. Even after leaving this address, Jan felt as if this house had poisoned her, and despite having left the house, shortly after completing her manuscript, Jan Bryant Bartell died under mysterious circumstances. Joel Steinberg was a criminal defense attorney when he moved into 14 West 10th Street with his girlfriend Hedda Nussbaum. The neighbor who would see them on West 10th Street described them as a professional couple who had even adopted 2 children, a 6-year-old girl named Lisa and a 16-month-old toddler named Mitchell. Maybe everything on the outside of 14 West 10th Street seemed okay, but inside the building was a completely different story. Joel often abused drugs. There were over 20 crack pipes in the apartment, along with large quantities of cocaine, marijuana, and there was over $25,000 in cash in the apartment. On the morning of November 2nd, 1987, a 911 operator received a call from the house from Hedda, the girlfriend. She said that Lisa, the 6-year-old daughter, was having difficulty breathing. But when the ambulance arrived, they found a lot more than a 6-year-old who wasn't breathing. Hedda answered the door, covered in bruises. She had 9 fractured ribs, a fractured jaw, a broken nose, cigarette burns, and gangrene on her right leg. When the paramedics stepped into the apartment, they found the infant boy, Mitchell, tied to his playpen with a length of rope, and he was soaked in urine and covered with dirt. As for the 6-year-old girl, Lisa, she was naked on the kitchen floor. Paramedics attempted to give her oxygen to revive her breathing, but unfortunately she never regained consciousness, and she died in the hospital just a few days later. What's worse is her autopsy revealed that her cause of death was repeated blunt force trauma to the skull. The night before, Joel had apparently gone on some sort of cocaine binge, beat his girlfriend and his daughter, and tied up his infant son before going out and having a few drinks with his friends. Hedda didn't call 911 until the following morning. Both Joel and Hedda were charged for Lisa's death, but charges were later dropped against Hedda on the condition that she testify against Joel. Medical examination also revealed that Hedda was incapable of seriously wounding Lisa just due to how malnourished she was. Authorities also learned that these 2 children were never legally adopted by this couple. After a successful petition, the infant boy, Mitchell, was returned to his birth mother. His birth mother would rename him Travis, and he would grow up to become a straight-A student and graduated from Trinity College, Hartford. At the time of Joel Steinberg's trial, first-degree murder didn't fit the crime, and the jury was unable to convict him of second-degree murder, but they were able to convict him of first-degree manslaughter. The maximum penalty for that was 25 years in state prison. Joel served 17 of those years before being released on parole in 2004. He currently lives in Harlem. This case made national news and helped to nickname 14 West 10th Street as the House of Death. It is a frequent stop on Greenwich Village ghost tours. So that's going to do it, everybody. How do you feel about New York City's most haunted building? Are you a believer in ghosts? Have a ghost story of your own? Drop it in the comments below. Also, make sure that you like, subscribe, and until next time, deuces, kids.